70 million years ago, on the island of Madagascar, one of the most formidable ambush predators was waiting beside a shrinking waterhole. It was a frog, not the kind that disappears into reeds or survives by avoiding danger. This one weighed around 4.5 kg, which is about 10 pounds. Its skull was reinforced with heavy plates of bone, its jaws carried recurved teeth, and its bite has been estimated at more than 2,200 newtons, stronger than that of many mammals, several times its size. Scientists called it Beelzebufo. Its species name, Ampinga, means shield in the Malagasy language, a reference to the extraordinary armor that covered its skull. Most frogs hunt insects. This one appears to have been built to overpower vertebrates. It lived alongside Majungasaurus, Madagascar's apex predatory dinosaur. Yet the evidence suggests there were places where even a hungry theropod would have been wise to watch its footing. Motionless at the edge of the water, Beelzebufo was perfectly designed for a single explosive strike. The stranger part of the story comes much later. Its closest living relatives are not found in Africa at all. They live thousands of miles away in South America, across an ocean frogs cannot cross. Somehow, two lineages separated by an entire ocean still carry unmistakable signs of the same ancestry. And despite becoming one of the largest frogs ever known, Beelzebufo disappeared completely from Madagascar, leaving no descendants behind. In this journey, we're uncovering how one amphibian grew into one of the most extraordinary predators of the dinosaur age, and what its existence reveals about a prehistoric world that looked very different from the one we know today. Before we start, let me know in the comments if you have any topic suggestions you would like me to cover in future videos. Now let's begin. Across the closing chapter of the Cretaceous period, between roughly 70 million and 66 million years ago, Madagascar occupied a place unlike anywhere else on Earth. The island had already spent millions of years drifting apart from neighboring continents, carrying its plants and animals into a long experiment shaped by separation. Life unfolded without the steady exchange of species that connected much of the ancient world. Every generation inherited an environment that rewarded unusual adaptations, gradually producing a community found nowhere beyond its shores. Much of what is known about this vanished landscape comes from the Mavarano Formation, preserved within the modern Mahajanga province of northwestern Madagascar. Layers of sandstone and mudstone accumulated across broad floodplains, recording countless seasons of overflowing rivers, drying channels, and shifting sediments. These rocks have become one of the richest late Cretaceous fossil deposits in the southern hemisphere, preserving the remains of creatures that once shared the same valleys and waterways. Piece by piece, their skeletons reveal an ecosystem assembled under conditions very different from those familiar today. Rain arrived in dramatic intervals. Powerful seasonal storms replenished rivers and scattered shallow pools across the floodplain, encouraging fresh plant growth and drawing animals across the landscape. Eventually, the skies changed, and prolonged droughts settled over the island. Watercourses narrowed into muddy ribbons. Smaller ponds contracted until only isolated pockets remained. Countless creatures gathered around these shrinking refuges, competing for each remaining drink. Some survived long enough for the next rainy season, many did not. Their bones accumulated together, later becoming the dense fossil beds that now provide remarkable glimpses into this ancient community. Madagascar had separated from India about 18 million years before Beelzebufo appeared, while its connection with Africa belonged to a much older chapter of geological history. Isolation transformed the island into an evolutionary workshop. Species continued changing without regular arrivals from surrounding continents, allowing distinctive forms to emerge through countless generations. The geography itself became part of evolution, shaping every successful lineage through opportunity, scarcity, and time. Large animals moved through this demanding landscape with equally distinctive roles. Majungasaurus stood at the top of the terrestrial food web, growing to nearly 8 meters, which is about 26 feet. This formidable predator belonged to the abelosaurid dinosaurs and remains one of the few known dinosaur species with convincing evidence of cannibalism. Rapidosaurus wandered the floodplain on towering limbs, browsing vegetation beyond the reach of smaller herbivores. Rohanovis displayed a fascinating mixture of bird-like and dinosaurian features, while Masiakasaurus carried an unusual arrangement of forward-pointing teeth, unlike those of nearly any other predatory dinosaur. Along rivers and pools, Mahajangasuchus ruled the water's edge, waiting with the patience expected of a powerful crocodile relative. The ground itself reflected the demanding rhythm of this environment. Iron-rich sediments produced reddish soils that baked beneath extended dry seasons before fresh floods buried them beneath new layers of silt. Riverbanks shifted, channels wandered, and drought repeatedly compressed life into narrow strips surrounding the last dependable water. Within those crowded margins, every movement carried consequence. Beelzebufo belonged perfectly to this setting. Its immense jaws, reinforced skull, and patient ambush strategy fit the pressures of an island where prey gathered predictably during the harshest months. The landscape did more than surround this extraordinary frog. It shaped nearly every feature that allowed it to endure within one of the most distinctive ecosystems of the dinosaur age. Every living frog carries a blueprint that has endured through an almost unimaginable stretch of Earth's history. Long before flowering plants spread across the continents, before birds filled the skies, and before the first dinosaurs reached their greatest diversity, the foundations of the frog body had already begun to take shape. Across more than 250 million years, countless species appeared and disappeared, continents drifted apart, and climates transformed, yet the essential design changed very little. Few vertebrate body plans have remained so consistently successful for such an extraordinary span of time. The earliest known member of this story is a small amphibian called Triatobatrachus massinoti. Its fossils were discovered in Madagascar and date to the early Triassic period, around 250 million years ago. It looked unfamiliar by modern standards. A slender tail still extended behind its body. Several extra vertebrae remained, where modern frogs possess only a compact structure. Its hind limbs lacked the proportions required for powerful leaps. Even so, its skull revealed unmistakable similarities to frogs alive today, preserving the first recognizable chapter in a lineage that would outlast entire worlds. As millions of years passed, natural selection refined that early framework. By the Jurassic period, roughly between 200 million and 150 million years ago, the familiar frog form had become established. The tail disappeared, replaced by a fused structure known as the Eurostyle, which strengthened the body during powerful jumps. The torso shortened, reducing weight while increasing stability. Long hind legs became specialized for explosive movement, and the head widened into an efficient platform for capturing prey. This arrangement proved so effective that evolution found little reason to replace it. That enduring design solved several biological challenges at once. Frogs divided their lives between water and land with unusual flexibility. Powerful hind limbs allowed sudden escape or rapid attacks. Their compact bodies remained easy to conceal among vegetation, mud, or fallen leaves. Wide mouths enabled them to swallow prey whole, although every meal remained limited by one unavoidable rule. Whatever entered the mouth had to fit through the opening. This simple physical limit shaped feeding behavior across nearly every frog species that followed. For most of their long history, frogs occupied modest positions within food webs. They fed primarily on insects and other small invertebrates, while serving as prey for reptiles, mammals, birds, fish, and larger amphibians. Their success came through abundance and adaptability instead of size. Generation after generation repeated the same dependable pattern, preserving a body plan that already worked exceptionally well across changing landscapes. One lineage eventually stretched that familiar design in a striking direction. The horned frogs of the family Ceratophryidae evolved in South America with broader skulls, thicker jaw muscles, and an appetite extending well beyond insects. Lizards, snakes, rodents, birds, and other frogs entered their diets whenever the opportunity appeared. Their enormous mouths and determined grip transformed them into ambush hunters, capable of overpowering vertebrates approaching their own size. Beelzebufo almost certainly belonged within this remarkable lineage. It inherited the same fundamental architecture that had endured since the earliest frogs, then carried each defining feature toward its biological limit. The broad head became broader still, the jaws grew heavier, the bite strengthened. Across 250 million years of gradual refinement, an enduring amphibian design briefly reached one of its most formidable expressions without abandoning the blueprint that had served frogs since the dawn of their history. The story of Beelzebufo did not begin with a complete skeleton emerging from the ground. It began with scattered pieces, weathered by deep time and locked within layers of stone that had guarded them since the closing days of the Cretaceous period. Each fragment appeared ordinary on its own, revealing little of the remarkable animal to which it once belonged. Only patience, repeated expeditions, and years of careful comparison allowed those isolated remains to become part of a much larger picture. In 1993, paleontologist David William Krauss of Stony Brook University began extensive excavations in the Mahajanga Basin of northwestern Madagascar. The project sought to uncover the extraordinary fossil record preserved within the Mayavarano Formation. Those same expeditions would later reveal famous dinosaurs, such as Majungasaurus, yet another collection of fossils attracted increasing attention. Mixed among countless bones were unusual fragments belonging to an amphibian unlike any previously discovered. The first remains consisted of isolated pieces of skull and scattered bones from the body behind the skull, known collectively as the postcranial skeleton. None rested in their original positions. Millions of years of burial, erosion, and geological change had separated them before they reached the hands of researchers. At first glance, they offered only hints. Some bones appeared unusually thick, others possessed textures unfamiliar among known fossil frogs. No single specimen revealed the full animal, leaving scientists to compare fragment after fragment while additional field seasons gradually expanded the collection. Years passed as each newly recovered piece found its place beside those already stored within museum collections. The process resembled assembling a puzzle with most of its pieces still missing. Every comparison sharpened the outline a little further, measurements aligned, surfaces matched, distinctive anatomical features repeated across different specimens. Gradually, an unmistakable conclusion emerged. Madagascar had once been home to an enormous frog unlike anything living on the island today. The formal announcement arrived in 2008 when Susan Evans, Mark Jones, and David William Krauss published the scientific description in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. For the first time, the remarkable amphibian received both a formal identity and a place within the scientific record. Their initial reconstruction suggested a body reaching about 41 centimeters, which is about 16 inches, from the tip of the snout to the vent. Estimates placed its weight near 4.5 kilograms, which is about 10 pounds. Those figures suggested one of the heaviest frogs ever identified, rivaling even the living Goliath frog of Western Africa. Its scientific name reflected the immediate impression created by those fossils. Beelzebufo combined Beelzebub, a figure from ancient Semitic tradition later associated with powerful demonic imagery, with the Latin word bufo, meaning toad. The species name, Ampinga, came from the Malagasy word, meaning shield, honoring the remarkably reinforced skull preserved within the fossil material. Scientific names rarely seek dramatic effect alone. They usually highlight anatomy, geography, or evolutionary relationships. In this case, the researchers chose language that conveyed the sheer presence suggested by those fragmentary bones. Even before additional discoveries refined the reconstruction, the fossils projected unusual strength, heavy armor, and formidable jaws. Long before anyone could imagine its complete appearance, those scattered pieces had already persuaded experienced paleontologists that they were examining an amphibian unlike any described before. Fossils rarely offer their full story at the moment they are uncovered. They arrive as fragments shaped by time, inviting revision whenever new evidence emerges. Beelzebufo followed that familiar path. The first scientific description introduced an extraordinary animal to the world, yet its exact proportions remained open to refinement. As additional material appeared and new technology entered paleontology, the image of this remarkable frog became sharper, revealing that understanding often grows through careful adjustment instead of dramatic reversal. The original reconstruction, published in 2008, relied upon the limited material available at that time. Even though the fossils clearly belonged to an unusually large amphibian, many bones remained absent, forcing researchers to estimate overall size by comparing preserved elements with those of living horned frogs. Those calculations suggested a body reaching approximately 41 centimeters, which is about 16 inches, from the snout to the vent, with a weight approaching 4.5 kilograms, which is about 10 pounds. Such estimates immediately placed Beelzebufo among the largest frogs ever proposed by science. Fresh discoveries gradually expanded the available evidence. In 2014, Susan Evans and her colleagues published a much more complete collection that included an articulated skull, portions of the vertebral column, and additional hind limb bones. These specimens preserved their natural anatomical relationships, providing a far stronger foundation for reconstruction than scattered fragments alone. Researchers also examined the fossils using microcomputed tomography scanning, allowing them to study both the external surfaces and the internal architecture of the bones without damaging the precious material. The revised picture proved more nuanced than many had expected. The most complete individual appeared somewhat smaller than the earliest reconstructions suggested, measuring roughly 19 centimeters, which is about 7.5 inches in body length from snout to vent. One important detail changed the interpretation entirely. The skull bones had not yet completed their fusion, showing that this individual had not reached full maturity. Instead of reducing the possibility of gigantic adults, the specimen hinted that additional growth still remained ahead. Its skull alone revealed why researchers remained convinced they were dealing with an exceptional predator. The preserved head measured approximately 154 millimeters, which is about 6.1 inches, across its widest point. That remarkable breadth exceeded the width of many human fists, creating an animal whose head dominated nearly every other aspect of its anatomy. The proportions suggested that feeding shaped the entire structure of the body from the beginning of its development. Comparison with living species placed those dimensions into clearer perspective. The Goliath frog of Western Africa, the largest frog alive today, can weigh as much as 3.3 kilograms, which is about 7.3 pounds. At the upper end of the estimates proposed for mature Beelzebufo, the fossil species may have approached nearly twice that mass. Even allowing for scientific uncertainty, few amphibians have ever occupied such an extraordinary range of body size. The refined reconstruction also highlighted features overlooked during the first description. Broad bony projections extending from the rear of the skull, known as posterolateral skull flanges, proved larger than originally recognized. They widened the head into an almost rectangular outline while creating additional space for powerful jaw muscles. Viewed as a whole, the skeleton conveyed an unusual impression. The legs supported movement, the spine connected the frame, yet nearly every major feature appeared arranged around one dominant structure. The head stood at the center of Beelzebufo's design, while the rest of the body served its formidable purpose. A skull can reveal more about an animal than almost any other part of its skeleton. It records the forces that shaped each meal, every defensive adaptation, and countless generations of evolutionary refinement. In Beelzebufo, the head carried an unmistakable message. Nearly every surface showed evidence that this frog had invested an extraordinary amount of energy into strengthening the bones surrounding its jaws. Few amphibians have ever devoted so much of their anatomy to a single region of the body. The scientific term for this remarkable condition is hyperossification. During development, additional layers of bone accumulated until the skull became far thicker and denser than ordinary structural support alone would require. The roof of the head formed a rigid shield instead of the lighter construction typical of most frogs. This striking characteristic inspired the species name Ampinga, taken from the Malagasy word meaning shield. It was an appropriate choice because the skull truly resembled protective armor fashioned through millions of years of natural selection. A related process, known as pachyostosis, describes the thickening of bone itself. Living horned frogs from South America also display this feature, confirming that the evolutionary pathway already existed within their lineage. Even so, Beelzebufo carried the pattern much farther than any known modern relative. The bones became broader, heavier, and more deeply sculpted, creating a head unlike that of any living frog. Evolution had expanded an existing design instead of inventing an entirely new one. This reinforcement served an important mechanical purpose. Powerful jaw adductor muscles stretched between the skull and lower jaw, generating the force required for an exceptionally strong bite. Those muscles depended upon stable attachment points, capable of resisting repeated stress. Thick bone protected those vital structures while providing a broad surface where the muscles could anchor securely. An injury affecting this region would have greatly reduced the animal's ability to capture prey, making protection of the skull an essential investment. The architecture of the skull also revealed unusually firm connections between the upper jaw and the surrounding bones. Similar features appear in living horned frogs, where they reduce movement between neighboring elements during feeding. In Beelzebufo, these reinforced joints transform the head into a remarkably unified structure. Instead of flexing under pressure, the skull distributed force across a rigid framework, allowing the jaws to function as one coordinated mechanical system whenever they closed around struggling prey. Its teeth completed that formidable arrangement. Many living frogs possess either tiny tooth-like projections or lack teeth altogether. Beelzebufo differed dramatically. Curved teeth lined the jaws, each one bending backward to improve its grip after penetration. Once prey became trapped, every attempt to pull away only increased the hold. Near the center of the lower jaw stood a prominent odontoid structure resembling a short fang. Living members of the horned frog family possess a comparable feature, using it to secure prey during powerful bites. In Beelzebufo, that projection almost certainly served the same purpose. Perhaps the most striking proportion appeared across the front of the head itself. The mouth occupied nearly the entire width of the skull, leaving very little space unused. Almost everything about this animal converged toward feeding. Bone, muscle, teeth, and jaw alignment worked together with remarkable efficiency, producing one of the most specialized predatory heads ever known among amphibians. The skull did far more than protect the brain. It became the defining instrument through which Beelzebufo interacted with its world. Strength is often measured by size, yet nature occasionally follows a different path. Some animals produce forces that seem completely out of proportion to their bodies, concentrating extraordinary power into remarkably compact frames. Beelzebufo belongs within that rare company. Its skull hinted at immense capability, but measuring the bite of an animal that disappeared 66 million years ago required an indirect approach built upon living relatives and careful biomechanical analysis. That opportunity arrived in 2017 through a study published in the journal Scientific Reports. Led by Christopher Lappin of California State Polytechnic University, the research represented the most comprehensive scientific investigation ever conducted into biting performance among frogs. Instead of relying on speculation, the team measured living horned frogs whose anatomy closely resembles that of Beelzebufo. Their goal was straightforward. If the relationship between skull size and bite strength could be understood in living species, the same relationship could be projected onto their gigantic fossil relative. The researchers worked with Cranwell's horned frogs, scientifically known as Ceratophrys cranwelli. Individuals of different sizes bit onto a force transducer, a precision instrument designed to record the amount of force applied at the jaws. Each measurement contributed another point to a growing pattern. Smaller frogs, larger frogs, broader heads, narrower heads. Every result strengthened the mathematical relationship emerging from the data. The experiment transformed a familiar amphibian into a living model for understanding one that vanished millions of years ago. One conclusion became especially important. Bite force did not increase in simple proportion with body size. Instead, it followed what biologists describe as positive allometric scaling. As the head became wider, biting strength increased even faster than overall body growth alone would predict. A modest increase in skull width therefore produced a disproportionately larger increase in force. This principle helps explain why broad-headed predators often become dramatically more powerful than their dimensions might initially suggest. Among the smaller horned frogs examined during the study, individuals with heads measuring around 4.5 centimeters, which is about 1.8 inches, generated approximately 30 newtons of bite force. That figure already exceeded what many people might expect from an animal small enough to fit comfortably in one hand. Once the researchers applied the same scaling relationship to Beelzebufo, the estimates expanded dramatically. Using the reconstructed skull width of approximately 154 millimeters, which is about 6.1 inches, the projected bite force ranged from roughly 500 newtons to as much as 2,200 newtons at the upper end. That equals about 224 kilograms of force, which is about 494 pounds. Such values overlap with the biting performance of medium to large mammalian carnivores, including animals comparable to leopards or lions. They also approach the range expected from crocodilians, possessing similar head dimensions. One detail makes those calculations especially intriguing. The fossil skull used for reconstruction belonged to an individual whose cranial bones had not yet completely fused, indicating continued growth. A fully mature adult may therefore have developed even greater force than the highest estimate proposed in the study, although responsible science leaves that possibility open instead of presenting it as certainty. Equally important was the manner in which horned frogs employ their bite. They do not slash, shake, or release immediately after striking. Their jaws close with determination and remain locked. Compression continues, while recurved teeth maintain their grip, steadily exhausting the struggling animal. Beelzebufo almost certainly relied upon that same sustained hold, turning extraordinary force into a patient and highly effective method of overpowering prey. Predators do not all rely on speed. Some achieve success by reducing movement until it almost disappears, conserving energy until a single opportunity arrives within reach. Beelzebufo belonged to that second tradition. Its body lacked the proportions of an endurance hunter. Every feature pointed toward brief bursts of overwhelming force delivered at exactly the right moment, after long intervals of waiting. Its hind limbs were powerful, though their structure suggests stability mattered more than distance. Modern frogs, famous for spectacular leaps, possess elongated legs designed for repeated jumping across open ground. Beelzebufo followed a different pattern. The skeleton indicates an animal that probably spent much of its time walking with deliberate movements, reserving explosive acceleration for the final instant before contact. A short lunge required far less energy than prolonged pursuit, an efficient strategy in an environment where food could become unpredictable between seasonal rains. Living South American horned frogs offer the closest behavioral comparison. They spend hours, sometimes days, resting with much of the body buried beneath loose soil or leaf litter. Only the eyes and the upper surface of the head remain exposed. Their coloration blends naturally with the surrounding ground until the distinction between predator and landscape almost disappears. Beelzebufo almost certainly practiced the same method. Muddy banks and loose sediment provided ideal cover, allowing its broad skull to merge into the earth while unsuspecting animals approached within striking distance. Once prey crossed that invisible boundary, the entire attack unfolded with astonishing speed. The body surged forward through a powerful extension of the hind limbs. At the same instant, the jaws opened to nearly the full width of the skull, creating the largest possible opening permitted by the frog body plan. The movement lasted only a fraction of a second before the jaws slammed shut under the full strength of the jaw muscles. An encounter that began with complete stillness ended almost immediately with overwhelming mechanical force. Frogs belong to a group known as gape-limited predators. They cannot chew prey into smaller pieces before swallowing. Every meal must pass through the opening of the mouth intact. Beelzebufo expanded this limitation as far as anatomy allowed. Because the mouth stretched across nearly the entire width of the skull, relatively large vertebrates could fit within its grasp. Evolution had widened the gateway as much as possible without abandoning the basic structure inherited from its earliest ancestors. The first bite rarely ended the struggle. Curved teeth lining the jaws penetrated the prey and resisted backward movement, functioning like rows of tiny hooks. Near the center of the lower jaw, the prominent odontoid projection pressed upward into the captured animal, adding another point of restraint. Every desperate movement pushed the recurved teeth deeper, while the reinforced skull and powerful muscles maintained relentless pressure. Escape became increasingly difficult with each attempt. Although frogs are famous for their sticky tongues, that remarkable organ probably played only a supporting role during encounters with larger prey. Living horned frogs often use the tongue when seizing insects or similarly sized animals, yet they depend primarily upon the jaws once prey becomes substantial. Beelzebufo almost certainly followed the same pattern, allowing bite strength instead of tongue projection to dominate the capture. The final stage remained unmistakably amphibian. Frogs swallow prey whole, and they possess an unusual adaptation that assists this process. During swallowing, the eyes retract downward into the skull, pressing against the roof of the mouth and helping force food deeper into the throat. Beelzebufo almost certainly shared this mechanism. Even after delivering one of the strongest bites known among frogs, its meal disappeared through a feeding behavior preserved across more than 250 million years of amphibian evolution. Few prehistoric animals have acquired a reputation as quickly as Beelzebufo. Among the most repeated claims is that it hunted dinosaurs, an image that has traveled far beyond scientific journals. The idea is rooted in genuine research, yet the evidence deserves careful treatment. Paleontologists distinguish between what fossils directly demonstrate and what anatomy makes possible, and Beelzebufo occupies that intriguing space between confirmed behavior and well-supported inference. The clearest scientific statement came from the study published in 2017, which concluded that Beelzebufo was capable of eating small dinosaurs. That single word, capable, carries considerable importance. No fossil has yet been discovered, preserving the remains of a dinosaur inside the frog's body cavity, nor has any bite mark been identified that can be attributed with confidence to Beelzebufo. The conclusion, instead, rests upon the remarkable combination of skull construction, jaw mechanics, tooth shape, and estimated bite force, all of which indicate a predator equipped to overpower vertebrate prey of suitable size. Modern South American horned frogs provide an informative comparison because they consume almost anything they can fit inside their mouths. Lizards, snakes, rodents, birds, other frogs, and even individuals of their own species regularly appear on their menu. Scaling that feeding strategy to the larger dimensions of Beelzebufo produces a realistic list of prey. Large insects almost certainly remained available, though they would have represented only a fraction of its opportunities. Lizards, small snakes, juvenile crocodile relatives, other frogs, and early mammals living during the Late Cretaceous all fall comfortably within the range suggested by its anatomy. The possibility of dinosaur prey enters naturally from the animals sharing the same landscape. Rapetosaurus, the enormous long-necked dinosaur of Madagascar, began life at a size dramatically smaller than its adult form. Masiacosaurus remained comparatively modest throughout its life, and newly hatched individuals would have been especially vulnerable. Juvenile Majungasaurus, despite belonging to the island's dominant predator, also passed through a stage when they were little more than ambitious youngsters exploring river margins and floodplains. A hidden Beelzebufo positioned beside a shrinking water source could plausibly have seized any of these if the opportunity appeared. Even so, Later discoveries encouraged additional restraint. Fossils described in 2014 suggested that the best preserved known individual had not yet completed growth because important bones of the skull remained unfused. That finding refined estimates of body size and raised fresh discussion about exactly which young dinosaurs lay within its practical hunting range. An infant Rapidosaurus may have been manageable. A juvenile Majungasaurus may have exceeded the limits of even this formidable amphibian. The evidence leaves room for continued debate without weakening the broader picture. Other conclusions stand on firmer ground. Every structural feature examined points toward a dedicated predator. The reinforced skull, recurved teeth, powerful jaws, and immense gape do not resemble the anatomy of an animal specialized for filtering food or gathering tiny insects. They belong to an ambush hunter designed to subdue active vertebrates whenever the chance presented itself. An unexpected twist completes the picture. During prolonged droughts, living horned frogs often survive by entering estivation, burying themselves beneath the ground until rain returns. Beelzebufo probably adopted the same strategy. National Geographic noted an intriguing consequence of this behavior. A buried frog, waiting for better conditions, could itself become a meal if a hungry juvenile Majungasaurus uncovered it while searching through dry sediment. In Madagascar's changing seasons, hunter and hunted may have exchanged places with surprising ease, each role determined by age, timing, and opportunity rather than permanent dominance. Water shaped every decision made by the animals of late Cretaceous Madagascar. Across much of the year, rivers expanded with seasonal rains before retreating again under relentless heat, leaving scattered pools across the floodplain. Each shrinking refuge became the center of an entire community, concentrating predators and prey within remarkably small spaces. Survival depended less on wandering widely than on reaching those remaining pockets before strength failed. At the edge of each muddy basin, the balance between hunter and hunted shifted from hour to hour. As the dry months deepened, the landscape gradually emptied toward these isolated water sources. Herds that had once ranged across broad stretches of open ground gathered shoulder to shoulder. Smaller reptiles slipped between their feet. Amphibians sought damp soil wherever moisture lingered. The scent of mud, decaying vegetation, and weakened animals accumulated around every pool. Scarcity compressed the ecosystem into narrow ribbons where encounters became almost unavoidable. Within the deeper channels waded Mahajangasukas, a formidable crocodile relative whose body reflected an existence built around ambush. Remaining close to the water offered advantages beyond concealment. Large prey eventually approached of its own accord, driven by thirst rather than carelessness. A single powerful rush from the shallows could transform an ordinary visit to the river into the final moment of another animal's life. The deeper water belonged largely to this patient predator whose presence influenced every creature approaching the bank. Beyond the immediate shoreline, Majungasaurus moved across the floodplain as the dominant terrestrial carnivore. Fossil evidence has revealed that this predator even fed upon members of its own species when food became scarce, offering a rare glimpse into the pressures imposed by prolonged drought. Such behavior reflects an environment where opportunities could not be wasted. Every carcass represented nourishment, regardless of its origin, and every weakening season tightened competition among the island's largest hunters. Even the immense Rapidosaurus could not always escape those pressures. During especially severe dry periods, groups of these giant long-necked dinosaurs gathered around dwindling water supplies until exhaustion and dehydration overwhelmed them. The fossil beds of the Maya Verano Formation preserve concentrations of skeletons that record these difficult intervals. Bodies accumulated where water disappeared, leaving lasting evidence of recurring environmental hardship rather than isolated catastrophe. Against this backdrop, Beelzebufo occupied a remarkably efficient position. It did not need to patrol great distances or challenge the island's largest predators directly. Instead, it settled near places where every thirsty animal eventually arrived, partly concealed within damp sediment. Its broad head blended into the uneven surface, while the surrounding traffic steadily increased. The landscape itself performed much of the work ordinarily demanded of an active hunter. Every passing day of drought narrowed the choices available to potential prey until many approached within striking distance. This ecological arrangement explains why exceptional mobility never became necessary. A predator relying upon concentrated gathering points gains little advantage from constant travel. Energy remained conserved while opportunity steadily accumulated nearby. Lizards, young reptiles, small mammals, amphibians, and perhaps vulnerable dinosaur hatchlings all entered the same confined spaces, each responding to identical environmental demands. Beelzebufo waited where necessity eventually guided them. Its role within this community rested between extremes. It did not dominate every other predator, nor did it survive by collecting insects alone. Instead, it occupied the middle tier of the food web with remarkable effectiveness, specializing in moments when exhausted animals paused beside fading pools. Along that shifting boundary, where firm ground dissolved into mud and water, thirst repeatedly overcame caution, and Beelzebufo turned one of Madagascar's greatest environmental hardships into its greatest hunting advantage. For much of each year, the greatest challenge facing Beelzebufo was not another predator. It was the gradual disappearance of water itself. Amphibians rely upon skin that remains permeable, allowing the exchange of gases while also permitting moisture to escape into the surrounding air. In a landscape where dry seasons stretched across many months, remaining exposed carried an increasing physiological cost. Without an effective strategy to conserve water, even a formidable hunter could eventually succumb to dehydration. Evidence gathered through the comprehensive revision published by Susan Evans and colleagues during the year 2014 revealed several anatomical traits that fit remarkably well with a burrowing existence. No fossil preserves the act itself, yet the combined pattern tells a coherent story. Rather than wandering in search of shrinking pools as conditions deteriorated, Beelzebufo appears to have possessed the physical equipment needed to retreat beneath the surface and endure until seasonal rains transformed the landscape once again. One clue appears along the side of the skull. Modern frogs that spend much of their lives underground commonly possess a reduced or entirely absent tympanic membrane, the external structure functioning as the eardrum. Beneath packed soil, airborne sound loses much of its usefulness, while an exposed membrane becomes vulnerable to abrasion during repeated digging. Beelzebufo shared this reduction, suggesting that hearing above ground had become less important than protecting the head during movement through compacted earth. Its remarkable skull, already strengthened for feeding, may also have served another purpose. The extensive bone growth covering the roof created an exceptionally durable surface capable of tolerating repeated pressure. A reinforced head would have been well suited for pushing into resistant soil, allowing the animal to force its way forward without damaging more delicate structures. The same architecture that supported an extraordinary bite could therefore contribute to excavation, demonstrating how one adaptation sometimes serves more than a single biological function. Further support comes from the vertebral column. The backbones carried unusually tall neural spines, providing expanded attachment points for powerful muscles extending along the body. In living burrowing frogs, strong trunk muscles help generate the force needed for backward digging, a technique in which the hind limbs loosen soil while the body gradually disappears below the surface. Comparable skeletal features in Beelzebufo indicate that substantial muscular power was available for precisely this kind of movement. Its closest living ecological parallels strengthen that interpretation. South American horned frogs, commonly known as Pac-Man frogs, inhabit regions where alternating wet and dry seasons shape their annual cycle. As moisture disappears, they dig downward with the aid of a hardened pad upon the foot, surrounding themselves with soil before entering a prolonged state of greatly reduced metabolism. Activity slows dramatically while energy consumption falls, allowing survival until rainfall restores favorable conditions above ground. The same rhythm almost certainly unfolded across the floodplains of the Mayavarano Formation. As ponds contracted and dust settled over cracked earth, Beelzebufo likely slipped beneath the surface, disappearing from an ecosystem it had previously dominated along the margins of fading water. Encased within cool soil, its heartbeat and metabolism would have diminished while precious moisture remained protected inside the body. Months later, returning rains could awaken the buried predator, allowing it to emerge into a transformed landscape where feeding, breeding, and survival resumed once more. Evolution had fashioned an animal capable of becoming almost absent, preserving life through patience instead of motion, then returning when the seasons invited it back. Every fossil carries two stories. One belongs to the animal itself, preserved in the shape of its bones. The other belongs to the world that placed those bones where they would one day be found. For Beelzebufo, those two stories refuse to separate. Its anatomy points toward one family, while its resting place points somewhere entirely different, creating one of the most intriguing geographical puzzles in vertebrate paleontology. Today, the closest living relatives of Beelzebufo inhabit South America. The horned frogs of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and neighboring regions share the same broad skull, reinforced jaws, ambush hunting style, and many distinctive skeletal features. These similarities extend far beyond superficial appearance. They suggest a genuine evolutionary relationship, linking a fossil from Madagascar with frogs living on another continent, separated by an enormous distance. That distance presents an immediate problem. Between Madagascar and South America stretches the entire breadth of Africa, followed by the South Atlantic Ocean. The separation amounts to thousands of kilometers, which is about 1,864 miles, across environments that frogs cannot survive. Their permeable skin absorbs salt rapidly, disrupting the balance of water and dissolved minerals essential for life. Even relatively brief exposure to seawater proves fatal for most frog species. The familiar explanation proposed for certain reptiles, insects, or small mammals drifting across oceans upon floating vegetation becomes biologically implausible for an amphibian with such fragile physiology. The puzzle therefore reaches beyond curiosity. It asks how an animal so closely allied with South American horned frogs appeared upon an island lying far to the east of Africa during the closing chapters of the Cretaceous period. If intermediate relatives had been discovered across Africa, they could have marked a gradual migration, yet the fossil record has yielded no such sequence. Late Cretaceous rocks throughout Africa have not revealed frogs bridging the evolutionary gap between Madagascar and South America, leaving an unexpected absence where many researchers would anticipate evidence. Another possible route has also failed to gather support. India once formed part of the same southern landmass as Madagascar before drifting northward across the ancient ocean. By the time Beelzebufo lived, however, India had already separated from Madagascar. Fossils from the Indian subcontinent have not uncovered comparable horned frog relatives that might explain a stepping stone between continents. That possibility has steadily weakened as additional discoveries accumulated elsewhere without filling the missing connection. A different explanation has therefore attracted serious scientific attention. During much earlier intervals of Earth's history, Antarctica was not an ice-covered wilderness. It supported forests, rivers, and climates capable of sustaining many forms of life. South America, Antarctica, and Madagascar all belong to the southern supercontinent known as Gondwana before tectonic forces gradually divided it. Some researchers have proposed that ancestral horned frogs dispersed across temporary land connections or chains of closely spaced land while these southern continents remained linked. Those pathways later vanished as continental drift widened the oceans and climates transformed. Within that interpretation, Beelzebufo becomes more than a remarkable predator preserved in stone. Its skeleton preserves geographical memory as faithfully as biological history. Every reinforced bone, every distinctive feature shared with distant South American relatives, hints that familiar maps do not always describe vanished worlds. Continents moved, coastlines dissolved, and ancient routes disappeared beneath rising seas. Yet one remarkable frog remained behind, carrying within its bones a fragment of Earth's forgotten geography. Imagine a continent clothed in forests instead of ice, where rivers threaded through broad valleys and seasonal sunlight reached groves of conifers, flowering plants, and ferns. The land now known as Antarctica once belonged to such a world. During the Late Cretaceous period, it occupied a far different place in Earth's climate system. Average temperatures have been estimated to range between about 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit and 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit, warmer than those of the modern continent. The frozen expanse familiar today had not yet taken shape, allowing terrestrial life to move across landscapes that have long since vanished beneath ice. Within that setting, one proposal has steadily attracted scientific attention. Instead of viewing South America and Madagascar as isolated realms, some researchers picture them as neighboring pieces of a broader southern network. A traveler moving across this ancient geography might have passed from South America into Antarctica, then continued through a chain of connected lands or closely spaced islands toward the combined India and Madagascar landmass. Those pathways disappeared as tectonic plates drifted apart, oceans widened, and climates transformed, leaving only scattered biological clues behind. This idea is known as the vicariance model. According to this interpretation, the ancestors of modern horned frogs spread across connected southern continents before those continents fragmented. As the landmasses separated over millions of years, isolated populations continued evolving independently. One lineage survived in South America. Another persisted upon Madagascar, eventually giving rise to Beelzebufo. The striking resemblance between these distant frogs would therefore reflect shared ancestry preserved through continental breakup instead of an improbable ocean crossing. Evidence supporting this possibility reaches beyond a single amphibian. Several reptile groups recovered from the Mayavarano Formation display closer relationships to South American species than to animals known from Africa. Each discovery adds another small piece to the same geographical pattern. None offers absolute proof on its own, Yet together, they suggest that southern ecosystems once exchanged animals far more freely than present day maps would ever imply. The fossil record begins to resemble scattered fragments of a larger picture whose missing portions remain concealed beneath oceans and polar ice. Another explanation remains entirely possible. Evolution often discovers similar solutions when unrelated creatures encounter comparable environmental pressures. This process, known as convergent evolution, can produce animals whose bodies resemble one another despite separate evolutionary origins. Under that interpretation, Beelzebufo may have developed its reinforced skull, broad mouth, powerful bite, and compact form independently, arriving at a body plan remarkably similar to South American horned frogs without descending directly from the same recent ancestors. Recent studies examining relationships among frog lineages continue to produce complicated results. As of 2023, Beelzebufo occupies an uncertain position within the broader frog family tree. Different analyses have reached different conclusions depending upon the anatomical characters examined and the methods used to compare them. That continuing disagreement reflects the genuine complexity of the evidence rather than a simple lack of information. Despite those competing interpretations, one conclusion has remained remarkably stable. The distribution of Beelzebufo does not fit comfortably within the geography of the modern world. Whether its history records ancient continental connections, deep shared ancestry, convergent evolution, or a combination of these processes, the fossil stands as one of the strongest biological signals that the southern continents were linked in ways still being reconstructed. Its bones preserve more than the outline of an extraordinary frog. They preserve a lingering trace of a world whose map has almost entirely disappeared. The puzzle surrounding Beelzebufo stretches far beyond the lifetime of any frog. Its story begins on a continent that no longer exists as a single landmass, a southern giant known as Gondwana. Long before today's coastlines emerged, this immense supercontinent united Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, India, Madagascar, and New Zealand into one connected world. Forests, rivers, and plains extended across boundaries that modern maps now divide with oceans, allowing plants and animals to spread through habitats that would later become separated by thousands of kilometers, which is about 1,864 miles. Gondwana did not disappear in a single dramatic event. Its breakup unfolded through a sequence of tectonic movements lasting tens of millions of years. Deep within Earth's crust, shifting plates gradually pulled the landmass apart, creating widening seas between regions that had once shared the same ecosystems. Every separation altered migration routes, isolated populations, and set different evolutionary stories in motion. The history of life across the southern hemisphere became inseparable from the order in which those continental fragments drifted away from one another. Madagascar followed its own remarkable path through that process. Geological evidence indicates that it separated from Africa roughly 160 million years ago, beginning a long period of increasing isolation. Much later, around 88 million years ago, Madagascar also drifted away from India. From that point onward, it stood alone within the Indian Ocean, surrounded by salt water that formed an immense biological barrier. Species already present continued evolving in isolation, while opportunities for new terrestrial arrivals became extraordinarily limited. According to the standard geological model, that final separation occurred well before Beelzebufo appeared, between roughly 70 million and 68 million years ago. If the accepted timeline is entirely correct, No continuous land connection should have linked Madagascar with any neighboring continent during the lifetime of this remarkable amphibian. A frog closely resembling South American horned frogs, therefore, becomes unexpectedly difficult to explain. Its existence introduces a detail that refuses to settle comfortably into the simplest reconstruction of southern continental history. Some researchers have suggested that Gondwana's final stages may have been more complicated than earlier models proposed. Temporary land connections, broad island chains, or lingering continental fragments could have survived longer than previously recognized, providing pathways for terrestrial animals before complete isolation took hold. Others remain unconvinced, pointing out that geological evidence for such routes remains incomplete. Both interpretations continue to be examined as new fossil discoveries and improved reconstructions reshape understanding of Earth's changing surface. Regardless of which explanation eventually proves correct, Beelzebufo has become more than an unusual fossil. Its skeleton joins a growing collection of organisms whose distributions preserve clues about vanished geography. Living creatures and fossilized bones sometimes record movements that coastlines alone cannot reveal. They become biological witnesses, carrying traces of landscapes erased by tectonic change, erosion, and rising seas. In that sense, evolution serves as an enduring archive, preserving fragments of journeys that no map has survived to document. The continents surrounding today's southern oceans appear stable within the span of a human lifetime, yet geology measures time through a far broader rhythm. Mountains rise, oceans widen, and familiar coastlines drift almost imperceptibly across millions of years. Beelzebufo belonged to one brief chapter within that immense transformation. Its presence reminds us that every fossil is shaped by both biology and geography, preserving the outline of an animal while also revealing the changing architecture of the world that carried it across deep time. Across the grasslands, wetlands, and woodland floors of South America, a familiar outline waits among scattered leaves and patches of loose soil. At first glance, it resembles little more than part of the forest floor itself. Only when prey wanders within reach does its true form emerge. These are the horned frogs of the genus Ceratophrys, often called Pac-Man frogs because of their broad, rounded mouths. Among all living amphibians, they provide the closest living comparison to the long-vanished Beelzebufo. Today, 8 recognized species of Ceratophrys inhabit parts of Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Ecuador, Paraguay, Bolivia, and neighboring regions. Although each species differs slightly in color and proportions, they all share the same distinctive architecture. Their bodies are compact and powerful, their heads disproportionately large, and their mouths extend almost the full width of the skull. Irregular patterns of green, brown, tan, and darker markings blend naturally with fallen leaves and damp soil, making an animal that can remain almost impossible to distinguish from its surroundings until it moves. That body shape supports a feeding strategy built on patience rather than pursuit. A horned frog rarely chases prey across the landscape. It settles into one location, often with much of its body buried, so that only the eyes and upper head remain visible. Every passing vibration and movement is assessed. The instant an animal enters striking distance, the frog launches forward with astonishing speed. Wide jaws snap shut around the target before there is much opportunity for escape. The entire sequence occupies only a fraction of a second. Field observations and captive studies reveal a remarkably broad appetite. Large insects, spiders, earthworms, other frogs, lizards, small snakes, young rodents, and even small birds have all been documented as prey. Size matters far less than opportunity. Anything that can be subdued and swallowed becomes potential food. Young horned frogs frequently consume one another when raised together, and adults may attack members of their own species if the size difference allows one to overpower the other. Such behavior reflects an opportunistic predator responding to movement, with little distinction between familiar and unfamiliar prey. Researchers have also experienced the strength of these jaws firsthand. During investigations into frog bite performance published during 2017, scientists described receiving bites that broke human skin. The frogs clamped down with surprising determination and often refused to release immediately. Although far too small to threaten a person in any serious way, their persistence demonstrates the same powerful feeding mechanics revealed through measurements of jaw force and skull construction. These living frogs offer an unusually valuable window into the behavior of Beelzebufo. Their shared skeletal proportions, expansive mouths, robust skulls, and ambush hunting strategy suggest a common ecological design, even though Beelzebufo reached a far greater size. The fossil cannot reveal every movement or habit, yet the daily lives of ceratophrys help fill many of those missing moments with reasonable scientific confidence. Watching one of these modern frogs disappear into leaf litter is therefore more than observing a living amphibian. It is also a glimpse across deep time toward an older relative that occupied another continent under another sky. The scale has changed, the landscape has transformed, and millions of years have passed, yet the essential pattern endures, preserved through descendants that continue practicing an ancient way of life with remarkable fidelity. The first glimpse of Beelzebufo did not emerge from a complete skeleton resting undisturbed in stone. It arrived as scattered clues, each preserved by chance, each separated from the next by distance, time, and the countless events that followed the animal's death. Reconstructing such a creature demanded an approach closer to careful detective work than simple description, because frogs leave behind some of the most difficult fossils in all of vertebrate paleontology. Unlike the dense skeletons of many reptiles or mammals, frog bones are comparatively delicate and lightly built. After death, scavengers, flowing water, weather, and shifting sediment often separate the skeleton before burial can preserve it. During expeditions across the 1990s and early 2000s, researchers recovered isolated skull fragments, together with scattered bones, from the rest of the body. These discoveries were enough to establish that an unusually large frog had once lived in the Maivarano ecosystem, yet many important details remained uncertain. The shape of the skull, the proportions of the limbs, and the posture of the animal could only be estimated within reasonable scientific limits. To bridge those missing pieces, paleontologists relied on comparative anatomy. Measurements taken from living horned frogs and other related amphibians provided mathematical relationships between known bones and those still absent from the fossil record. When a preserved skull element matched a particular proportion in living relatives, researchers could cautiously estimate the dimensions of neighboring structures. Every estimate remained clearly identified as an inference rather than direct evidence, preserving a distinction between observation and reconstruction that forms one of the foundations of careful paleontological practice. A major advance arrived during 2014 with the discovery of additional articulated material. Unlike isolated fragments, articulated fossils preserve bones in their original anatomical positions. These specimens offered a far more dependable guide to the overall structure of the animal. The arrangement of the skull became clearer. The vertebral column could be reconstructed with greater confidence, and the proportions of the hind limbs no longer depended entirely upon comparison with living species. Each newly connected bone reduced another layer of uncertainty surrounding the remarkable amphibian. The same investigation also employed high resolution computed tomography scanning. Instead of examining only the outer surfaces exposed by preparation, researchers could explore the interior architecture of the fossils without damaging them. Fine canals running through the vertebrae became visible, along with the internal structure of the broad skull flanges and the dense pattern of bone growth across the sculptured skull roof. These details remained inaccessible through ordinary visual inspection alone, yet they carried important information about strength, development, and function. Those scans refined earlier interpretations in meaningful ways. The broad rear flanges of the skull proved even more pronounced than originally believed. The heavily ossified surface texture appeared denser throughout the skull roof, reinforcing previous conclusions about its remarkable construction. Evidence also confirmed the absence of a tympanic membrane, strengthening the interpretation that Beelzebufo shared important adaptations with living burrowing frogs. Even now, the portrait remains unfinished. Much of the skeleton behind the skull is still represented by incomplete material, and details such as skin texture, coloration, and many soft tissues remain beyond direct preservation. Scientific illustrations, therefore, combine fossil evidence with carefully reasoned inference, openly acknowledging where certainty ends. In that honesty lies one of paleontology's greatest strengths, allowing each new fossil to refine an image that continues to grow clearer without ever pretending to be complete. A scientific name is often the first bridge between an extinct creature and the modern world. Before illustrations, fill books, or museum displays give shape to fossil bones, a formal name becomes the identity by which every future discovery is known. For Beelzebufo, that identity emerged through the careful rules of zoological classification, published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal after detailed examination and comparison. The chosen words carried far more meaning than dramatic effect alone. The first half of the name reaches deep into human history. Beelzebub appears in traditions that stretch from the ancient Semitic world into later Jewish and Christian writings, where the figure came to represent one of the most powerful demonic beings in religious literature. In some later traditions, the name even became another title associated with Satan. Its older origin lies in the Hebrew expression Baal-zebub, commonly translated as Lord of the Flies, referring to a deity once worshipped by the ancient Philistines before later monotheistic traditions transformed that figure into a symbol of evil. When the researchers searched for a suitable name, they were looking for language capable of expressing the unusual combination of traits revealed by the fossils. This was not a harmless pond dweller with delicate proportions. Every reconstructed feature suggested a predator equipped with a reinforced skull, crushing bite, broad jaws, and an appetite extending well beyond insects. The name Beelzebub reflected that impression. It captured the formidable character of the animal without claiming anything supernatural about its true nature. The choice belonged to the long scientific tradition of using mythology, history, and literature to describe remarkable organisms. The second half of the name comes from Bufo, the classical Latin genus once widely associated with true toads. Although modern classification has changed the boundaries of that historic genus, the word continues to evoke the image of a broad-bodied terrestrial amphibian. Combined with the first element, the complete name formed Beelzebufo, joining an image of overwhelming predatory power with the unmistakable form of a giant toad-like frog. The species name, Ampinga, introduced another layer of meaning. Derived from the Malagasy word for shield, it honored both the country where the fossils were uncovered and the extraordinary skull that distinguished the animal from nearly every other known frog. The heavily armored head, strengthened by thick sculptured bone, formed one of the defining features that allowed paleontologists to recognize the species. In a single word, the scientific name acknowledged geography, language, and anatomy together. Outside academic circles, the fossil soon acquired memorable nicknames. Newspapers, documentaries, and museum exhibits introduced audiences to the frog from hell, the devil frog, and the devil toad. Each title echoed the original inspiration chosen by the describing scientists, translating the formal Latin name into language that ordinary readers could immediately picture. Although less precise than the scientific designation, these popular names helped the fossil reach far beyond professional paleontology. Every scientific name represents an act of interpretation as well as classification. Fossils cannot announce themselves or preserve the sounds once surrounding their lives. They arrive as stone and bone, waiting for careful study. Through that process, Beelzebufo Ampinga received a name that linked forgotten landscapes, human history, and biological evidence, allowing a creature absent from the living world for roughly 70 million years to enter conversation once more. Measured against the span of Earth's history, frogs have become less a single group of animals than a continuing thread woven through catastrophe after catastrophe. Entire landscapes have vanished, oceans have changed chemistry, continents have drifted apart, and dominant forms of life have risen only to disappear. Through each upheaval, the frog lineage endured. Its story stretches across every one of the 5 great mass extinction events recognized by paleontologists, making frogs among the most resilient vertebrates ever to exist. Their endurance did not arise from overwhelming strength or exceptional speed. It emerged from a body plan that demanded comparatively little from the world around it. Many frogs require modest amounts of food, mature quickly, and can retreat into burrows when conditions become hostile. Numerous species reduce their metabolism during drought or cold, conserving energy until favorable seasons return. Their eggs and tadpoles can exploit temporary pools that appear after rainfall, while adults consume almost any prey small enough to swallow. These qualities rarely attract attention during ordinary times, yet they become powerful advantages when ecosystems begin to fail. The deepest trial arrived roughly 252 million years ago during the end Permian extinction. It remains the greatest biological crisis known, eliminating more than 90% of species living at the time. Volcanic eruptions altered atmospheric chemistry, climates shifted dramatically, and food webs collapsed across land and sea. Frogs, as they exist today, had not fully evolved, although their closest ancestral relatives already occupied the world. Somehow that lineage persisted, while countless others disappeared forever, preserving the evolutionary foundation from which later frogs would emerge. Another immense transformation unfolded roughly 66 million years ago with the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. A large asteroid struck Earth, triggering darkness, global wildfires, disrupted climates, and widespread ecological collapse. Non-avian dinosaurs vanished, along with many marine reptiles, flying reptiles, and countless other organisms. Frogs crossed that boundary once again. Their modest energy requirements, flexible diets, and capacity to shelter underground likely improved their chances during months and years when food became scarce and environmental conditions changed with unusual speed. Survival alone was only part of the story. Once forests recovered and ecosystems began rebuilding, frogs expanded into opportunities left vacant by vanished animals. Molecular clock studies indicate that three major modern frog lineages, together representing most of the roughly 7,000 living species recognized today, diversified rapidly after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. The disappearance of dominant reptilian groups opened ecological roles that frogs could occupy across wetlands, forests, rivers, grasslands, and mountain environments. Diversity increased as descendants adapted to habitats that earlier ages had offered only sparingly. Beelzebufo belonged to one branch within that broader saga. Although its own lineage eventually disappeared, the characteristics explored throughout this journey reflected strategies shared by many surviving relatives. Burrowing habits, adaptable feeding behavior, patient ambush hunting, and efficient use of limited resources all echoed a design refined across extraordinary spans of geological time. The giant predator of Madagascar was one expression of a blueprint already proven resilient beyond almost any other among terrestrial vertebrates. Each fossil frog therefore carries two stories at once. One belongs to an individual species whose world has long vanished. The other reaches across hundreds of millions of years, revealing a lineage that continued through devastation after devastation. While many celebrated giants entered history only to disappear, frogs remained, carrying forward an enduring design shaped by repeated encounters with Earth's greatest moments of change. Every fossil species reaches a point where the record falls still. For Beelzebufo, that point lies near one of the most dramatic boundaries in Earth's history, close to the transition between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods. Its remains disappear from the rocks at approximately the same time the Chicxulub asteroid struck the planet, ending the age of the non-avian dinosaurs. Whether the giant frog survived until the final moments of that catastrophe or vanished slightly beforehand remains uncertain, because the upper layers of the Mayavarano Formation approach the boundary without preserving its exact position. That uncertainty leaves room for careful interpretation, though the broader picture remains consistent. Nothing suggests that the asteroid itself reached Madagascar as a direct force capable of targeting one amphibian. The greater danger unfolded afterward, as darkness, disrupted climates, widespread fires, and collapsing food webs transformed ecosystems across the globe. Even regions far from the impact experienced profound ecological change. The consequences spread through forests, rivers, floodplains, and wetlands, altering the balance that countless species depended upon. The world surrounding Beelzebufo unraveled piece by piece. Majungasaurus disappeared. Repetosaurus vanished as well. Numerous smaller reptiles, mammals, invertebrates, and other animals either declined sharply or disappeared entirely. The productive margins of seasonal waterways no longer offered the dependable rhythm that had supported generations of ambush predators. An ecosystem functions through countless living connections, and when enough of those links fail together, survival becomes increasingly difficult, even for species that appear exceptionally well adapted. For an animal that relied upon patience instead of pursuit, this collapse carried particular consequences. Beelzebufo waited for prey to approach within striking distance, conserving energy until a single explosive movement secured a meal. Such a strategy succeeds when insects, reptiles, mammals, and other amphibians remain abundant. It becomes far less reliable when prey populations shrink across entire landscapes. Unlike active hunters capable of traveling long distances in search of food, A sit and wait predator depends on stability, returning to familiar places. Once that dependable flow of prey disappeared, the advantages that had served Beelzebufo for millions of years became increasingly fragile. Its disappearance also proved unusually complete. No descendant survived on Madagascar, and no closely related horned frog lineage later recolonized the island. The frogs inhabiting Madagascar today belong to entirely different evolutionary groups that arrived through separate histories long after Beelzebufo vanished. The ecological role once occupied by this heavily built predator remained unfilled by any close relative, making its chapter on the island unique within the fossil record. A remarkable contrast unfolded across the Atlantic Ocean. South American horned frogs, the closest living relatives of Beelzebufo, according to one leading interpretation, endured beyond the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. Conditions there appear to have allowed enough populations to persist through the environmental crisis, preserving the lineage into the modern world. They still conceal themselves among leaves and soil, waiting for movement before launching the same rapid strike that their larger relative almost certainly employed. The ending of Beelzebufo, therefore, carries an unusual symmetry. A predator refined through millions of years disappeared as the world supporting it dissolved, while kindred frogs survived elsewhere and continued the lineage. Across continents, separated by immense spans of ocean and time, those living hunters preserve a final echo of a giant amphibian whose voice faded with the close of the age of dinosaurs. Across Earth today, there are approximately 7,000 known species of frogs and toads. Together, they represent a greater diversity than all birds of prey, all primates, and all large land mammals combined. Their ancestors endured planetary upheavals that erased forests, reshaped oceans, and transformed climates beyond recognition. For roughly 250 million years, the frog body plan persisted through disasters that ended countless other evolutionary stories. Yet within little more than half a century, that long record of resilience has entered one of its most difficult chapters. The greatest threat emerged from an organism so small it escaped notice until the closing years of the 20th century. A chytrid fungus known as Batrachochetrium dendrobatidis attacks the skin of amphibians, the same living surface they depend upon for breathing, maintaining water balance, and regulating vital chemical processes. Infection thickens the skin until those essential functions begin to fail. Animals that appear healthy can weaken with startling speed, their bodies unable to maintain the delicate balance that amphibian life requires. Researchers now recognize this fungus as the most destructive infectious disease ever documented among vertebrate animals. Its impact has reached nearly every continent where amphibians live. Current scientific estimates indicate that more than 500 frog species have suffered severe declines linked to the disease, while at least 90 species have disappeared entirely. Entire mountain valleys that once echoed with breeding calls have fallen still as populations collapsed within only a few breeding seasons. Recovery has proven difficult because surviving frogs often face repeated exposure, while isolated populations have little opportunity to rebuild their numbers before another outbreak arrives. Evidence suggests that the fungus originated in East Asia before spreading across the world through international trade in amphibians. Frogs transported for food, for the pet trade, and for scientific or medical purposes carried the pathogen far beyond its original range. One notable pathway involved the African clawed frog, widely distributed during the middle decades of the 20th century for use in hospital pregnancy testing. Animals moved between countries long before anyone understood they might also be carrying a microscopic passenger capable of transforming ecosystems thousands of kilometers away, which is about 1,864 miles. Disease alone tells only part of the story. Wetlands disappear beneath expanding agriculture and growing cities. Forests become fragmented into smaller patches that isolate breeding populations. Shifting rainfall patterns alter ponds that exist only for brief seasons, leaving eggs and tadpoles without dependable water. Pollution changes the chemistry of streams, while introduced predators consume native amphibians that evolved without such competitors. Many frog species now experience several of these pressures at the same time, leaving little opportunity for recovery between one disturbance and the next. Madagascar, once home to Beelzebufo, now shelters more than 300 frog species found nowhere else on Earth. Many occupy remarkably small ranges, surviving within individual forests separated by valleys or mountains. Their uniqueness reflects millions of years of isolation, yet that same isolation leaves them especially vulnerable when habitats shrink or disease arrives. The island that preserved the memory of one extraordinary predator now carries another story, one measured by living voices, growing fewer with each passing generation. Frogs have endured nearly every natural catastrophe Earth has produced. The challenges of the present arise with unusual speed, testing a lineage whose greatest strength has always been time itself. A wetland is shaped not only by water, plants, and soil, but also by the countless exchanges between creatures that feed, reproduce, and disappear within it. Every successful hunter alters the choices available to another animal. Every prey species that survives or vanishes changes the rhythm of the community around it. Frogs occupy a remarkable position within that living network. They are neither fixed at its base nor settled firmly at its summit. Instead, they connect many layers of the food web at once, carrying energy and nutrients through ecosystems with an influence that is often greater than their modest size suggests. As predators, frogs consume extraordinary numbers of insects and other invertebrates. In tropical forests, wetlands, and grasslands, they rank among the most effective natural regulators of insect populations. Beetles, flies, spiders, termites, ants, worms, and countless other small animals become part of a constant transfer of energy into amphibian bodies. Their hunting rarely appears dramatic, yet multiplied across thousands of individuals living within the same landscape, those repeated strikes help shape the abundance and distribution of many smaller creatures. A healthy frog population therefore contributes to ecological balance through steady, everyday feeding rather than rare displays of dominance. Their own place in the food web is equally important. Frogs are eaten by snakes, birds, fishes, small mammals, turtles, and even larger frogs. Energy gathered from countless insects does not remain within amphibians for long. It continues upward through predators that depend upon frogs as reliable food sources during breeding seasons and periods of rapid growth. When frog populations decline, that interruption extends far beyond a single species. Animals higher in the food chain lose an important source of nourishment, while insects that once faced heavy predation may increase in number, creating new pressures throughout the surrounding habitat. The influence of frogs reaches beyond feeding relationships alone. Their lives begin in water, where tadpoles graze upon algae, consume decaying organic material, and filter suspended particles. Through those activities, they help recycle nutrients that might otherwise accumulate within ponds and streams. After transformation into adults, they leave the water carrying that stored energy onto land. Nutrients gathered in aquatic environments become available to terrestrial predators, linking habitats that might otherwise function more independently. Frogs therefore serve as living pathways between fresh water and dry ground, transporting biological resources across ecological boundaries every day. Within the wetlands of the Mayavarano landscape, Beelzebufo almost certainly occupied a comparable position on a larger scale. Its powerful jaws and ambush strategy suggest a predator capable of regulating populations of smaller vertebrates living along the water's edge. Lizards, juvenile crocodilomorphs, early mammals, and other animals within reach may all have formed part of its diet. Each successful capture influenced more than a single life. Every prey animal removed represented one fewer hunter feeding upon insects, hatchlings, or smaller reptiles nearby. Ecologists studying living wetlands have repeatedly observed that the disappearance of an ambush predator produces consequences that spread through many layers of the ecosystem. Prey populations expand, their own prey declines, vegetation changes as grazing patterns shift, and even the movement of nutrients through soil and water may follow a different course. Such trophic cascades demonstrate that predators shape landscapes through relationships as much as direct hunting. Beelzebufo likely played exactly that role during its time, standing as one important thread within a network whose strength depended upon every connection holding together. Size is never a random gift of evolution. Every unusually large animal represents countless generations shaped by opportunity, limitation, competition, and chance. Beelzebufo stood far beyond the ordinary dimensions expected of a frog, occupying the extreme edge of what the Anaran body plan appears capable of achieving. Explaining that remarkable scale begins with the landscape that surrounded it, because evolution enlarges a species only when the environment consistently rewards becoming larger instead of remaining small. Among the most familiar evolutionary patterns is island gigantism, the tendency for certain species living on isolated islands to evolve bodies much larger than those of their mainland relatives. This pattern has appeared repeatedly in unrelated groups across Earth's history. Rodents, lizards, birds, and reptiles have all produced outsized descendants after becoming isolated from continental ecosystems. The repetition of the pattern suggests that similar ecological conditions often guide evolution toward comparable outcomes, even when the starting animals share little resemblance to one another. The leading explanation centers on ecological opportunity. Continental environments usually contain many competing predators and herbivores, occupying nearly every available role. An island often begins with fewer competitors and fewer large predators. Under those conditions, species that would remain relatively modest elsewhere may gradually expand into ecological positions that would already be occupied on a continent. Larger body size allows access to broader food resources, greater energy storage, and the ability to overpower prey that smaller ancestors could never capture. Across many generations, natural selection favors individuals that continue moving toward those newly available roles. Madagascar provided exactly the kind of prolonged isolation capable of supporting such change. After separating from India roughly 88 million years ago, it remained apart from every major continent for tens of millions of years. During that span, its ecosystems followed their own evolutionary course. Many ecological positions, commonly filled by large mammals elsewhere, either remained vacant or were occupied by entirely different groups of animals. Evolution on the island unfolded according to local possibilities rather than continental expectations, allowing unusual combinations of species to develop together over immense stretches of time. Predators and prey also influence one another through an ongoing evolutionary dialogue. A slightly larger predator can subdue larger prey, gaining access to new sources of food. Larger prey, in turn, may benefit from increased size that reduces vulnerability. Within an isolated ecosystem, where competing predators are limited by geography and evolutionary history, this process can gradually encourage a lineage to expand into body sizes that would prove difficult to maintain in more crowded continental communities. The result is a predator adapted to opportunities unique to that island alone. Many famous island species illustrate the same principle from different directions. The Komodo dragon became the dominant terrestrial predator across parts of the Indonesian archipelago. Giant tortoises evolved independently on the Galapagos Islands and the Aldabra Atoll. Mauritius produced the dodo, while Madagascar later became home to enormous elephant birds. None of these lineages invented gigantism through identical pathways, yet each demonstrates how isolation repeatedly reshapes familiar animals into forms that seem improbable when compared with their mainland relatives. Beelzebufo appears to fit naturally within that broader evolutionary pattern. Beginning with ancestors resembling the already robust South American horned frogs, the lineage encountered an island whose ecological history permitted continued expansion. Over millions of years, the familiar horned frog design stretched toward its biological limits without abandoning the characteristics that had made it successful from the beginning. Its broad skull, powerful jaws, and compact body remained recognizably amphibian, even as its overall proportions grew into something that has never appeared again among living frogs. A skeleton is never a complete biography. Every fossil begins as scattered evidence, and every conclusion grows from careful comparison rather than direct witness. Beelzebufo is no exception. Everything proposed about its behavior emerges through inference, combining preserved anatomy with observations of living relatives and ecological models that test what such an animal could realistically have done. The result is neither speculation nor certainty, but a disciplined effort to reconstruct a life that disappeared roughly 70 million years ago. Some aspects stand on especially firm ground. Fossil remains establish an approximate body size range with reasonable confidence. The skull preserves its broad proportions, the heavy sculpturing across the bone surface, and the arrangement of its teeth. Those features allow researchers to estimate bite performance using scaling relationships measured in living amphibians and other vertebrates. The shape of the limbs and joints also offers clues about posture and movement. Certain anatomical characteristics suggest an animal suited to digging into loose soil, supporting the idea that it could partially bury itself while waiting for prey. Combined with the mechanics of its jaws, these features indicate a predator capable of tackling a broad range of animals appropriate for its size. Other details remain beyond the reach of available evidence. No preserved stomach contents have ever revealed the last meal of a Beelzebufo individual. No associated prey fossils confirm precisely which species it consumed. Its breeding behavior remains unknown, including where eggs were laid or how young developed. Scientists cannot recover its calls from fossil bone, leaving any vocalizations beyond reconstruction. The exact texture of its skin, its coloration, the patterns that may have broken up its outline against the ground, its lifespan, and the precise pace of its metabolism all remain unanswered. Those gaps exist because soft tissues and fleeting behaviors rarely survive the immense passage of geological time. Such limits are not weaknesses in paleontology. They define the discipline itself. Responsible reconstruction depends upon distinguishing observations from interpretations at every stage. A fossil can demonstrate anatomical capability, while behavior is expressed as probability. That distinction explains why researchers describe Beelzebufo as capable of consuming small dinosaurs instead of declaring that it certainly hunted them. The available evidence supports the possibility without proving individual hunting events. Scientific language deliberately reflects that difference, preserving accuracy even when the most dramatic conclusion might attract greater attention. Confidence grows when several independent approaches arrive at the same destination. In Beelzebufo, fossil anatomy points toward a heavily built ambush predator. Comparative biology reveals striking similarities with living South American horned frogs that hunt from concealed positions. Ecological modeling shows that such a strategy would fit the wetland margins of late Cretaceous Madagascar. Phylogenetic analysis places the animal among relatives already adapted for powerful bites and opportunistic feeding. Each line of evidence stands on its own foundation, yet together they reinforce the same portrait far more convincingly than any single source could accomplish. Even now, the story remains unfinished, and that openness is among the greatest strengths of science. The Mayavarano Formation continues to yield new discoveries with every field season. More complete skeletons could refine limb proportions. Associated fossils might reveal prey relationships. An exceptionally preserved specimen could answer questions that currently rest beyond reach. Every new discovery has the potential to sharpen, revise, or expand what is known. Until then, Beelzebufo exists at the meeting point between evidence and imagination, where disciplined curiosity gives voice to a creature whose world has long since faded into stone. Motion often receives the greatest attention in stories about predators, yet Beelzebufo followed a different path. Its success depended upon restraint, carried almost to perfection. Every feature examined so far, from the broad skull to the crushing jaws and sturdy limbs, points toward an animal that gained its advantage before any strike ever began. The decisive moment lasted only an instant. Everything preceding it was an exercise in waiting, allowing the surrounding world to continue its ordinary rhythms until opportunity drifted within reach. For an ambush hunter, every movement carries a cost. Muscles consume energy, exposed bodies invite detection, and long pursuits rarely guarantee success. Remaining fixed in place offers another solution. The predator settles where prey regularly passes, blending into its surroundings until its outline disappears among fallen leaves, cracked soil, or the edge of shallow water. Time itself becomes part of the hunting strategy. Each passing hour demands little from the hunter while increasing the chance that another animal will eventually wander close enough for a single explosive attack. Nature has reached this solution many times without shared ancestry. Crocodilians rest near riverbanks with little sign of life until jaws close in one swift motion. Trapdoor spiders wait beneath carefully constructed lids of soil. Mantids hold their forelegs folded while insects drift closer. Certain snakes coil among vegetation until an unsuspecting animal crosses their range. Anglerfish suspend themselves within deep water, drawing victims with a small lure instead of searching through darkness. Across forests, rivers, oceans, and grasslands, evolution repeatedly arrives at the same conclusion. Careful patience can achieve what constant pursuit cannot. Certain environments make this strategy especially rewarding. Dense concentrations of prey create dependable opportunities without requiring travel across great distances. water sources shrinking during prolonged dry seasons, gather thirsty animals into narrower spaces where encounters become increasingly frequent. Prey, distracted by drinking or competing with one another, pays less attention to subtle danger. A hunter equipped with excellent camouflage and low metabolic demands can remain in position while expending remarkably little energy. Each unsuccessful hour costs very little, making eventual success more valuable than repeated chases that might fail. Beelzebufo appears remarkably well suited to such conditions. Like many living frogs, it probably tolerated lengthy periods without feeding, drawing upon stored energy until circumstances improved. A burrowing lifestyle would have offered protection from harsh surface conditions while preserving moisture within the soil. When seasonal rains finally returned, dormant landscapes transformed into places crowded with breeding animals, emerging insects, reptiles, and countless creatures seeking fresh water. A predator already waiting at those gathering points would encounter an abundance of potential prey arriving almost on its own. There is an unexpected parallel between this biological strategy and the broader history that shaped it. The lineage leading toward Beelzebufo persisted through immense stretches of evolutionary time, carrying a body plan that changed more gradually than many other vertebrate groups. Generation followed generation across millions of years, each preserving traits that continued to function. Then, within the distinctive conditions of isolated Madagascar, that enduring design expanded into one of the largest frogs ever known. Evolution itself displayed a form of patience, accumulating small changes until an extraordinary animal emerged during a particular chapter of Earth's history. The fossil record preserves only scattered traces of that existence, yet those fragments continue to describe a predator whose greatest strength began before it moved at all. In its world, waiting was never an absence of action. Waiting was the action itself, refined through deep time into one of nature's most enduring ways of surviving. Sometimes the greatest surprise carried by a fossil has little to do with the animal itself. Instead, it changes the landscape drawn around it. Beelzebufo became one of those discoveries. Once its closest known relatives were identified among the South American horned frogs, the finding reached beyond anatomy and into geography, raising new questions about how distant continents exchanged life during the closing chapter of the age of dinosaurs. The frog became part of a broader puzzle whose pieces were already emerging from Madagascar's remarkable fossil record. Other animals from the island pointed in the same unexpected direction. Boyd snakes, discovered in late Cretaceous deposits, showed stronger relationships with South American forms than with African ones. Certain side-necked turtles belonging to the podocnemid lineage revealed a similar pattern. Iguanid lizards also appeared more closely connected to South American relatives. No single discovery overturned accepted ideas, yet together they formed an accumulating pattern that encouraged scientists to look again at long accepted reconstructions of southern continental history. That discussion centers on two competing explanations. The first is known as vicariance. Under this model, related species inherited their shared ancestry from populations living across connected land before continental movement gradually separated them. As the land masses drifted apart, descendants evolved independently while retaining evidence of their common origin. The second explanation is dispersal, in which animals crossed existing barriers after the continents had already separated, perhaps by floating on vegetation mats, moving through temporary island chains, or following other unexpected routes across the sea. For many groups, either explanation may remain plausible. Frogs present a more demanding case. Their permeable skin loses water readily and provides little protection from prolonged exposure to salt water. Eggs and larvae are equally vulnerable to marine conditions. A lengthy ocean crossing, therefore, becomes exceptionally unlikely compared with reptiles, whose eggs and skin tolerate harsher environments. Because Beelzebufo belonged to a lineage closely allied with South American horned frogs, many researchers view shared ancestry through connected land as the more convincing explanation, although the discussion remains open and evidence continues to accumulate. Antarctica occupies an increasingly important place within that conversation. During the Late Cretaceous, it did not resemble the frozen continent familiar today. Fossil plants reveal forests growing across regions now covered by thick ice. Tree trunks, leaves, and pollen describe temperate landscapes capable of supporting diverse ecosystems. Animal fossils remain comparatively uncommon, yet the discoveries recovered there indicate that vertebrate communities also inhabited those environments. Rather than standing as an icy barrier, Antarctica may have served as a living corridor linking southern continents during intervals when climates remained considerably warmer. If that interpretation proves increasingly accurate, the implications extend far beyond a single frog. Maps of the late Cretaceous would require important revisions, showing Antarctica as an active biological passage instead of an isolated endpoint. Organisms could have expanded across connected habitats over immense spans of time, leaving descendants that later appeared separated only after climates cooled and continents completed their long journeys apart. Such a picture better accommodates the growing collection of South American connections preserved within Madagascar's fossil record. Beelzebufo alone cannot settle this debate, and paleontologists readily acknowledge that limitation. Its importance lies in adding another carefully examined piece to an evolving mosaic. Since its description in 2008, new phylogenetic analyses, improved geological reconstructions of the southern oceans, and additional fossil discoveries have continued to refine, challenge, and sometimes complicate earlier interpretations. The conversation remains active because science advances through accumulating evidence, and this remarkable frog continues to influence how researchers imagine the geography of a vanished world. There comes a point when numbers stop behaving like measures and become landscapes of thought. 70 million years belongs to that realm. It cannot be held against the span of a human life, nor comfortably compared with the rise of civilizations or the memory preserved in written history. It stretches into deep time, a dimension where familiar scales dissolve, leaving only the slow rhythm of continents, climates, and evolving life. When Beelzebufo rested beside the wetlands of the Mayavarano Formation, every ancestor that would eventually contribute to the story of modern humans occupied a far humbler place in the living world. Those distant mammals were small, active mostly after darkness settled across the landscape, feeding on insects while sharing a planet ruled by far larger creatures. Humanity did not yet exist, even as an idea within evolution. The chain leading toward our own species remained one slender branch among countless others, carrying no sign that it would someday produce observers capable of uncovering fossils and wondering about vanished worlds. Everything surrounding that frog belonged to an Earth unlike the one familiar today. Continents occupied different positions. Ocean currents followed altered paths. Atmospheric chemistry differed from modern conditions, influencing climate across the globe. Forests grew where different habitats now stand, and entire groups of animals flourished that have no living counterparts. Food webs followed arrangements shaped by circumstances that disappeared long before human history began. Within that setting, the edge of a shrinking pool became the stage for an ambush predator whose existence would have seemed impossible if known only from living frogs. The remarkable part is not merely that such a frog existed, it is that its body belonged to a lineage carrying a design refined over immense stretches of evolutionary time. While countless other groups appeared, diversified, and vanished, the essential architecture of frogs endured with striking consistency. That resilient framework proved capable of occupying many different ecological roles, including one that allowed Beelzebufo to become a formidable hunter within its island home. Evolution did not require an entirely new blueprint. It reshaped an old one until it reached an extraordinary expression. Deep time also reverses many assumptions formed from a human perspective. Animals often celebrated for their dominance, including giant dinosaurs and spectacular marine reptiles, disappeared forever despite their impressive size and influence. Organisms that appear delicate by comparison have persisted through repeated environmental upheavals. Frogs, insects, and small mammals have crossed extinction boundaries that erased seemingly invincible giants. Survival across geological ages has depended less upon outward power than upon adaptability, resilience, and the ability to continue changing as the planet itself changed. Beelzebufo eventually disappeared, its distinctive branch ending within Madagascar after a remarkable chapter lasting roughly 4 to 10 million years. Even so, the broader lineage continued beyond that loss. South American relatives endured the same extinction event that closed the age of dinosaurs, carrying forward a heritage reaching back through more than 250 million years of evolutionary history. Across shifting continents, changing climates, and repeated biological crises, that lineage remained. The fossil resting within stone therefore represents more than a single remarkable frog. It preserves a fleeting moment within a story so immense that individual species appear like brief notes inside an unending composition. Deep time grants no permanence, yet it preserves continuity through change, allowing fragments of vanished worlds to speak across 70 million years with surprising clarity. An island can remain in the same place on a map while becoming an entirely different world. Madagascar offers one of the clearest examples of that quiet transformation across geological time. The land that once supported Beelzebufo has endured changing climates, shifting coastlines, volcanic activity, rising and falling seas, and the disappearance of countless species. The outline of the island remained recognizable, yet the living community upon it was rewritten again and again until little resembled the landscape that existed during the closing chapters of the Cretaceous period. When Beelzebufo occupied the margins of seasonal wetlands, Madagascar supported a collection of animals unlike any found there today. Giant titanosaurs crossed open terrain. Predatory abelisaur dinosaurs hunted across dry floodplains. Crocodile relatives, turtles, lizards, mammals, and birds formed intricate food webs shaped by conditions that vanished after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction. As millions of years passed, extinction removed familiar inhabitants while new arrivals gradually reached the island, establishing lineages that evolved in remarkable directions under prolonged isolation. Present day, Madagascar stands as the fourth largest island on Earth and one of the richest centers of biodiversity ever documented. More than 90% of its native species exist nowhere else. Lemurs occupy forests with dozens of distinct lifestyles. Chameleons display extraordinary variation in size, color, and behavior. The fossa became the island's largest native mammalian predator. More than 300 species of frogs inhabit streams, rainforests, mountains, and temporary pools, each representing an evolutionary experiment shaped by isolation across immense spans of time. Despite that astonishing diversity, none resembles Beelzebufo in either size or ecological role. Modern Malagasy frogs are dominated by comparatively small species, many delicate in build and closely tied to humid habitats. Some spend their lives among leaves, others inside bamboo, while several develop directly from eggs without passing through a free swimming tadpole stage. These adaptations demonstrate remarkable creativity, yet the formidable ambush predator that once waited beside shrinking waterholes has never reappeared. Its ecological position has remained vacant for roughly 66 million years, suggesting that the combination of environmental pressures allowing such a giant evolved only once. That absence carries particular significance because Madagascar continues to function as one of evolution's great natural laboratories. Isolation repeatedly encouraged lineages to explore possibilities unavailable elsewhere. Given enough time, familiar ancestors produced unfamiliar descendants, each responding to opportunities unique to the island. Beelzebufo belonged to that tradition just as surely as today's lemurs, chameleons, and endemic frogs. Every one of these organisms reflects a biological path that could not have unfolded in quite the same way anywhere else on the planet. The island now faces a different challenge. More than 90% of Madagascar's original forest cover has disappeared through clearing for agriculture, logging, charcoal production, and expanding settlements. Many endemic animals occupy increasingly fragmented habitats, leaving populations vulnerable to disease, invasive species, and changing rainfall patterns associated with a warming climate. Species that persisted through tens of millions of years of natural environmental change now confront pressures unfolding across only a few human generations. Beelzebufo survives only through scattered fossils preserved beneath layers of stone, while Madagascar continues to nurture extraordinary forms of life unlike those of any other place. Together, they reveal a single, enduring lesson. Isolation does not merely protect biodiversity, it creates possibilities that cannot be repeated once they are lost. Every surviving endemic species carries forward that long tradition, each one another distinctive expression of an island that has always kept remarkable secrets. In a pet shop somewhere in the world at this very moment, a South American horned frog is almost certainly resting inside a glass enclosure, broad-headed, nearly motionless, waiting with extraordinary patience. To most observers, it appears unremarkable, almost decorative in its stillness. Yet within that compact body lives a hunting strategy whose roots may reach back toward the age of Beelzebufo. Across an almost unimaginable span of time, one lineage endured while continents shifted, climates transformed, and countless other creatures vanished from the earth. The living South American horned frogs stand as the closest surviving relatives of the giant frog that once inhabited Madagascar. They share the same broad skull, the same powerful jaws, and the same remarkable approach to hunting. Neither depends upon speed across open ground. Each succeeds through concealment, restraint, and a sudden burst of force concentrated into a single decisive instant. Their diets remain equally flexible. Any animal small enough to overpower becomes a possible meal, whether insect, reptile, bird, mammal, or another amphibian. That willingness to seize opportunity whenever it appears has remained one of the defining strengths of the lineage. Although the resemblance is striking, these frogs should not be imagined as diminished copies of Beelzebufo. They followed their own evolutionary path after the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction reshaped life across the planet. During the succeeding 66 million years, changing environments in South America refined them into animals adapted to forests, grasslands, and wetlands. very different from the floodplains once occupied by their distant relative. Evolution preserved the essential framework while allowing countless smaller adjustments to accumulate through generations. Modern researchers know well that these frogs possess determination far exceeding their size. A startled horned frog may clamp onto a finger and refuse to release its grip for several moments. It can consume prey surprisingly large compared with its own body, relying upon muscular jaws instead of prolonged pursuit. Between meals, it may remain almost perfectly still for days, partly buried in loose soil, with only its eyes and the upper surface of its head exposed. The waiting itself becomes part of the hunt, conserving energy until movement within reach transforms stillness into action. Watching such behavior offers an unusual glimpse across geological ages. The pause before the strike, the explosive closing of the jaws, and the refusal to waste unnecessary effort belong to a strategy already established while dinosaurs still dominated terrestrial ecosystems. Those instincts were not invented recently. They were inherited through an evolutionary history extending beyond 250 million years, surviving repeated environmental upheavals that erased innumerable other biological experiments. That continuity can feel almost impossible to comprehend. A horned frog resting behind the glass of a modern enclosure is expressing patterns of behavior that echo those once performed by a giant armored frog along the margins of a Cretaceous floodplain. The surroundings have changed beyond recognition. The prey differs. The climate differs. Entire continents have drifted apart. Yet the essential design remains recognizable, carrying forward a successful solution refined across deep time. Beelzebufo itself disappeared long ago, leaving only fossils embedded within stone. Its nearest living relatives continue the story without fanfare, waiting with the same enduring patience that shaped their ancestors. In every measured pause before the next strike, the distant past persists, not as memory, but as living inheritance. Beelzebufo leaves behind more than fossil bone. It offers a clear view into the character of evolution itself, revealing a process that never planned for giants, never aimed toward perfection, and never followed a predetermined path. Across deep time, life has advanced through countless small adjustments, each preserved only if it improved the chances of survival and reproduction. The enormous frog that once occupied Madagascar emerged through that same patient accumulation, shaped by circumstances unique to one place and one moment in Earth's history. The frog body plan was never a temporary stage awaiting replacement by something more sophisticated. It proved successful remarkably early, and success removed any need for dramatic redesign. Across roughly 250 million years, frogs retained the same essential arrangement of limbs, jaws, spine, and hunting behavior because those features continued to solve the challenges placed before them. Evolution rarely discards an effective solution. It modifies details, adjusts proportions, and refines performance while preserving the underlying framework that already functions well. Madagascar eventually presented a rare combination of ecological opportunities. Isolation reduced familiar competitors while opening roles that remained vacant across much of the island. A lineage already equipped with broad jaws and powerful bites encountered conditions where increased body size brought additional advantages. Larger individuals captured larger prey, gained access to greater energy, and passed those successful traits into future generations. Across many thousands of generations, ordinary variation gradually accumulated until an extraordinary frog appeared, not through sudden transformation, but through the steady preservation of favorable differences. Nothing within this process required foresight. Evolution possesses no awareness of the forms it creates. It does not recognize monsters, marvels, or milestones. Each generation differs only slightly from the one before it. Those slight differences either persist or disappear according to how effectively they function within a particular environment. Beelzebufo was assembled through that continual filtering, carrying forward inherited features while adding refinements that suited a dry seasonal landscape filled with opportunities for an ambush predator. The circumstances that favored such an immense frog did not endure forever. Environmental change, shifting ecosystems, and the global disruption surrounding the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction altered the balance that had supported this remarkable specialist. The giant form disappeared, along with the ecological conditions that rewarded it, yet the deeper blueprint remained alive within surviving relatives across South America. Smaller horned frogs continued expressing the same essential design, prepared for environments where modest size offered greater advantages than enormous strength. Viewed across geological time, this pattern appears again and again. Certain branches expand into unusual forms when opportunity allows, then contract when conditions change. The disappearance of an extreme expression does not erase the lineage that produced it. Instead, evolution continues working with surviving populations, preserving traits that remain useful while allowing others to fade. Life advances through continuity far more often than through reinvention. Beelzebufo therefore stands as a reminder that every living species represents only a temporary expression of an ongoing process. Some forms endure for millions of years with surprisingly little alteration because they continue meeting the demands of their surroundings. Others flourish only briefly before disappearing. Frogs persisted while countless seemingly dominant creatures vanished, carrying an ancient design across changing continents, shifting climates, and repeated extinctions. Their story suggests that endurance often belongs not to the grandest forms, but to those whose foundations remain adaptable across the longest reaches of time. Across the red stone of the Mahajanga Basin, countless stories remain sealed within layers that have waited longer than human imagination can comfortably measure. Somewhere inside those rocks, more bones of Beelzebufo almost certainly still rest where time placed them, untouched since the closing chapters of the Cretaceous period. Their long concealment carries an echo of the animal itself. Long before it became a fossil, this great frog spent much of its existence waiting with remarkable patience, allowing the world to approach before revealing its presence in a single, decisive instant. Each field season returns researchers to the Maya Verano Formation with familiar tools and renewed questions. Every fragment uncovered has the capacity to sharpen old ideas or replace them with better ones. A more complete skeleton could refine estimates of body size. New fossils from neighboring species could reshape the ecological picture surrounding this unusual predator. An exceptional discovery might even preserve evidence that has never before been recovered, expanding the story in directions impossible to predict. The stone has not surrendered everything it remembers. Science, therefore, remains in conversation with Beelzebufo instead of delivering a final verdict. Its place within the frog family tree continues to be examined through new anatomical studies and revised evolutionary analyses. The animals it consumed are reconstructed from mechanics and ecological context instead of direct proof. Even the broader question of how close relatives came to occupy distant southern continents continues inviting careful investigation. Each conclusion rests upon evidence that can grow stronger as additional discoveries emerge, reflecting the willingness of science to refine itself whenever better information appears. Even with those remaining uncertainties, one truth stands with remarkable clarity. The next frog, resting beside a pond, hidden among leaves after rain, belongs to a lineage that has endured across roughly 250 million years. Continents separated, mountain ranges rose and wore away. Oceans widened, entire groups of dominant animals flourished and disappeared. Through every transformation, frogs persisted, carrying forward a body plan that repeatedly proved capable of meeting whatever new conditions Earth presented. Their endurance never depended upon grandeur. Frogs survived through flexibility, careful use of energy, efficient reproduction, and an anatomy that continued serving them across changing worlds. During one remarkable interval on Madagascar, those enduring foundations supported something extraordinary. A branch of that ancient lineage expanded beyond the familiar limits of frog biology, becoming an ambush predator powerful enough that even young dinosaurs may have approached the water's edge with unusual caution. Eventually, the wetlands changed, the ecosystem disappeared, and Beelzebufo passed into history. Rain continued falling across the island, sediment covered the remains, minerals slowly replaced living tissue until bone became stone. Millions of years later, those buried traces emerged once again beneath careful hands, allowing an ancient presence to speak through fragments assembled with patience equal to the one that shaped it. The great frog itself never returned, its lineage did. Every living horned frog carries a distant reflection of that forgotten experiment, preserving habits refined across immense stretches of time. In that continuity lies the lasting significance of Beelzebufo. The giant vanished, yet the patient design endured, moving through extinction after extinction until it reached the present day, reminding us that the deepest victories in evolution are often measured not in strength or size, but in the ability to remain when nearly everything else has disappeared.